Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Greetings and salutations, and welcome to this tutorial on how to build a chatbot with just vanilla JS. One of the first things I did when I started my YouTube channel was to create a few videos on how to create a chatbot with React. And that's basically what you see in front of you here. You could install a package with npm and you could easily set up a chatbot um, using some amount of configuration. And I built the documentation as a chatbot as well, just because I thought it was fun and you could interact with it and see uh, what goes on in this package. Now, I initially built it in React, and I thought this would be a great opportunity to take something that's, fairly complex and translate it into vanilla JS. And the reason I want to do that is because I really believe in understanding the basic concepts and actually working a lot with basic JavaScript and really hammering down on just using vanilla JavaScript, because once you understand the basics, you're no longer dependent on the frameworks and you can more easily understand what they do and what they give you. And obviously, all of us all the time use frameworks in our day-to-day jobs, or if we're trying to break into the industry, we need to know the frameworks, because otherwise there won't be any jobs for us to apply to, because in reality most people in their day-to-day work will use a framework these days. So knowing a framework is really important as well. But I think that once you have time and once you kind of landed your first job, spend a lot of time on the basics if you haven't already, and it's going to pay off in spades. I promise you that. So this is going to be a lot of fun, because I'm going to get to do a lot of things that I normally use frameworks to do, and it's going to be challenging, I'm sure, but hopefully we'll all learn something in the process. So without further ado, let's just go ahead and get started on this. So I did some basic setup just to get started, and I'm going to show you exactly what I did. So here's my code editor. I'm going to increase the size of the font a little bit, and we're going to go through this basic setup. So we have a HTML file here with a hello world h1 in it. There's a CSS file that just sets up box sizing, border box, removes the margin and padding on the body, and just centers whatever's inside the body in the middle. And we have a min height of 100 VH, which is viewport height. So the body will be as tall as our viewport or browser window. Now, also set up some font families, and basically just set that to be Montserrat. So if we open this in the browser, this is what we get. So we have this hello world basic shell that we're going to be using to work from. So let's go ahead and start this on a HTTP server, just so we can develop and have a server serving us our content on port 8000. So that's up and running now. So if we go to localhost 8000, we'll get the same results. And let's have a look at the react-chatbot-kit docs, just to see what we have to do in order to get started. So we can see here that the chatbot takes at least 3 parameters here that we need to configure. And that's a config a message parser, and an action provider. I'm not going to go into too much detail on how these three things work. If you want to, you can check out the documentation or my other videos on how this work. And we're going to learn a lot about how it works in the process of actually implementing it. So for now, I'm just going to gloss a little bit over it, and we'll come back to it later when we go and implement these different features. So for now, we just know that we need some kind of function that takes in these three parameters. So let's go ahead and get started on that. So inside of our source directory, we have an index.js file. Now we need to make sure that we source this file in our HTML file. So we'll do script, and we'll source the index.js file, and the type will be module. And that's going to make sure that we can use modules and imports in our JavaScript files. So let's go ahead and console log here just to make sure that it's working. And we need to restart our server because we changed the HTML file. So refresh here, server's up and running, and our script is connected to the HTML page and it's now up and running. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create a entry point for our JavaScript. So we'll define an element that JavaScript will hook onto. So we'll say div class equals, and let's call it react-chatbot. Not react-chatbot, vanilla chatbot. That's better. All right, so we have our div here. I'm gonna go ahead and restart the server again. Now we'll grab this element here, and we'll call it root. That's going to be document query selector root, vanilla chatbot, and we'll say call it root element or root L, and then we'll say, just for fun, we're gonna create an h1, create element h1, and we'll set the header text content to be chatbot, and then the root L is going to append this element to itself. So now we just head back to the browser. Obviously we have an issue here, and that's because we're getting the class vanilla chatbot, so we need a dot here, and that's going to take care of all our troubles for now. So we have our new header here, and we know that we can now target the root element and inject JavaScript onto our HTML page. So that's awesome. Now let's go ahead and make sure that we have the function that we need to render this chatbot. So we'll say we'll create a function called render chatbot, and it will accept a root element, it will accept a config, it will accept a message parser, and it will accept an action provider. So that's going to match up exactly with the same properties that we pass in React. And if you think about it, this syntax right here, so the JSX that defines the chatbot and the properties here, under the hood, once JSX is transpiled, that is transformed into a function call. So this is not HTML. React is not HTML. JSX is basically just a better way to write function calls. So you can think about this as actually being the same as what we're doing right here. Except we're not passing in the root element because that's already handled by React DOM. So, but here we need to do it because we need to attach this to the root element that we pass in. So we have to do more work ourselves when we're doing it the vanilla way. That's just the way it is. So we have that, and we're going to call it for now, and we'll pass in the here. We'll take this and we'll place that inside of the function, and then once we call the function down here, we'll pass in the root element. And I think we should have the same result right now. And we do. All right, so now we put it into a function call. Let's get started on actually recreating the chatbot. And what we can do is we can look at the source code for the React version. We can see if there is anything we can kind of grab and place into our own project. So I'm going to bring up the source code for the chatbot here, make that full screen. And this is the React version. And it's broken up into components here on the left hand side. So what we want to look at first might be the actual chat component. Right. So here we have a little bit of logic and have basically a container. We have a inner container, and then we have the react-chatbot-kit header. Let's get started with the header. So we'll go ahead and we'll grab this div here, which in JSX world is actually a function, but never mind that. We'll take this and we'll create that element in the vanilla.js project. Let's go over to chat CSS, grab the react-chatbot-kit header. And remember, this is all open source, so you can go ahead and find this project on GitHub. I'll put a link in the description, and you can follow along if you want to do the same or work with me on this. So let's go ahead and actually create or put the header, and we'll just call it a vanilla chatbot-kit header, and we'll put that here, and then we'll go ahead and we'll create a header component. So create a div, and we'll say header class list add, and we'll say header text content equals, and we'll go ahead and write conversation with, and what we actually want here is config bot name. So we have now a dependency on config, so we need that to be passed in. So let's go ahead and create a config down here, and we'll put in bot name. That's going to be, in this case, vanilla bot. All right. So now we have that. Let's go ahead and see what that looks like. Browser. Hit refresh and we get absolutely nothing. So can't read bot name of undefined. Okay, that's definitely true. Let's go ahead and fix that. And now we have this. And it has the unfortunate effect of being the same color as the background. So for now, let's go ahead and leave it like that. We'll see if we can't do anything about the background on the body here. We'll make it entirely white. Maybe we'll give it another color. Dark blue one. Because we're going to be working with a lot of white. Let's change that. Excuse me. All right, so we have the header. Next up, let's go ahead and try to just recreate the body here. And I want to go back to my React project. And let's see. It's messages has its own container. Then we have a chat input container. We have a container around the whole thing and an inner container. That's fine. So let's go ahead and recreate. We'll create the inner or the outer containers first, and then we'll get started on the message container. So let's go ahead and first we'll grab the react-chatbot-kit containers from the CSS file. So grab these two. We'll copy them over to our other project. Put them down here. We'll change this to vanilla. And now we'll create these containers in our code. So we'll go to render chatbot. We'll go ahead and we'll create a new file or a new folder in source called chat. And we'll create chat.js. And we'll create render chat. And we'll export render chat from this function. From this file, sorry. And then we'll import from that same directory. So let's go ahead and move this in here. And we'll go ahead and we'll create functions for this. Create header. Going to be one. Create wrapper or create containers. Going to be one. And that is what we'll start with. So we'll put this inside of create header. We'll return the header element. And then create containers will be let's see. All right, so we'll say that our chat root equals create containers. Let's think about the structure just for 1 second. So we have an outer container, then we have an inner container, and everything needs to be inside the inner container. So that means that we have to think about where we create the inner container. So I think what we'll do is we'll skip this function here, and we'll create a chat container. Let's say document create element div. Let's say inner container is going to be document create element div, and we'll give the chat container a class. That class is going to be this one, and remove that, and we'll grab the other one, and we'll give that to the inner container. So inner container class list add this, and then we will do chat container. We'll append inner container. So now everything that we want to append to the inner container needs to happen before this. So inner container append child, then we'll call create header, and then we'll do just thinking about this, I probably need to do this a lot of times, so I'm thinking maybe I'll do this in a loop, but we'll do it manually first and then rewrite if we see that it's necessary. So we're adding the header here, returning the chat container, and inside of our index file, we now need to call the render chat function. So render chat, and this is going to have a dependency on the config. So we'll go ahead and pass in the config to the chat function or render chat, and we'll accept that here, and we need to pass it down to the header, which is going to use it to set the properties that we need. And we now have still the same result, still just a header, but now we've set ourselves up for adding the rest of what goes underneath here. So we'll focus on this message section next. Let's go ahead and go back to our React project, and we'll go ahead and check out what's next. So yeah, the chatbot message container is going to be the next one. So this one, and we'll grab that class, put it in our CSS. We'll call that vanilla as well. And let's go over to our chat, and we'll create a new function called create message container. And we'll create a container, we'll document create element to container class list add, and we'll give it our class, not the entire declaration. And then we'll return the container. Eventually we want to put all our messages inside of it, but for now we'll do the easy version, and we'll do it more advanced as we go along. So we're creating the container, we're adding the class list, and let's just verify that we have what we expect. And we don't, so that is because we are pending create message container, creating it, we're returning it. Right, let's see what's going on. Nothing. We still only have the header here. So sure everything's working as intended. So we're not finding the chat file apparently. Text.js, yeah, makes sense because we need JS here. All right, so yep, that's totally true as well. We have a space in our class here, and config's not defined. That was in chat.js line 17. Yeah, we need to accept that as a parameter, and then we use it as the argument here. So all right, so now we have the message container in its place, and things are moving along quite nicely. So let's go ahead and add the next section from our React version. So we're going to grab the React input container and go ahead and create a function for that as well, but we'll start with putting the CSS in its place. And this time I actually wanted to grab the styles, not just the name, so you'll have to forgive me for that. So let me just go to chat CSS. We'll grab the input container, the input form, the placeholder, the button, yeah, everything here. And we'll go back, move this, paste this in, and remove that because we already copied that over from before. Now we'll change all of these to be vanilla. And we'll get started on actually building out this form. So the first thing we're going to need is a function. And we're going to say create form. Yeah, let's just do create form. And we'll create a container that's going to be document create element div, and it's going to be container class list add, and we'll grab this class, the chat input container, right? And let's see, next thing we want is the form. Let's just verify that. So we have the chat input container, then we have the chat input form. All right. Form equals document create element form. Say form class list add. Put in the vanilla. Yeah, that's the correct one. Now the next thing is the input. That's going to be the same procedure we'll say input, but now we need to put on a few variables. So we'll have a placeholder. We'll say input placeholder, and we'll say write your message here. And we're going to give it an on change and handle the functionality later, but for now we'll keep it simple and just focus on the markup, and then we'll worry about the details later. So let's go ahead and add the input class, and that's going to be this one. And let's see our application. What's next? Need a button and a SVG here. All right, so we'll go ahead and create a button in here. And we'll say button class list add, grab the button class. And the button is going to have just the SVG icon. And yeah, we're not gonna implement this custom button style right now. We'll worry about that later. But the icon needs to be styled. So I have the icon in the assets folder here. Just going to go ahead and inline this SVG, copy that over. Actually, let's go ahead and use an image tag. So we'll go to source that. We'll go ahead and const image equals document create element image. We'll go ahead and give the image a source. It's going to be assets paper plain SVG, and it's going to have an alt tag paper plain, and going to have an image have class that we defined earlier. That's going to be this one. Okay, that's not going to work anyway, but let's just do this for now, and then we'll go ahead and we'll change the color in the SVG. We fill white. All right. So let's try and tie this together. Might have missed something, but we'll figure that out as we go along. Container. That's going to. All right. So let's begin with the button and child. That's going to have the image, and then we'll have the form is going to have. Let's check. So we have the input and the button in the form, and the form is a child of the input container. All right. So the form is going to have the input and the button, and then the container is going to have the form, and we'll return out the container. So let's go ahead and put this on here. That's going to be create form. Refresh. Almost. So we can't find this file, and that's not weird at all because it's the wrong path. There we go. All right, so let's fix that by putting in the correct path, and we'll go ahead and hit refresh. Cool. So now we have the input section done. Next thing we're going to do is focus on the actual chat messages. So let's get started on that. I'm gonna go and check out the chat components, and it's going to have this render messages function. And that's going to render either a user chat message or a regular chat message. So let's just focus on creating those two. I'm gonna go back to the vanilla application. I'm gonna create two new functions. We'll create user chat message, and we'll say like this. And now we're going to go and take a look at the user chat message first. So we'll go to this component. We'll go ahead and grab the user chat message styles, all of them, and we'll bring them over. And we'll change the React to vanilla then. So now we have the styles. So let's go ahead and get started on building out this component. So that's going to start with a div, and we'll skip some of this complexity. Just do the simplest version first. So let's get started with the user chat message container. We'll use our old friend, create elements, the container, class list, add. And the next part, the user avatar container, and we'll create that as well. All right. Then we have the avatar icon, which in this case, it's going to be let's have it as just a So we have an avatar icon, or we have, let's see. So we always have the avatar icon. All right, I see. So then let's go ahead and see if we can't grab that icon and put it in. So what we are going to do is we're going to use something called font awesome that we also use for our paper plane that we have here in the send button. So let me just go ahead and grab the user icon and put it into this project really quickly. So that's going to give our user icon a fresher look. I'm just going to go ahead and grab a user icon, put it into this project that we're working in. And this is happening off screen, so you'll have to forgive me for that. Basically, I'm just copying a file over to our assets folder here. So now we should be able to use our user alt icon, and we're going to create it as an image. Element image, and I will say image source equals, do the same thing as we did with this one. Oops. And we'll go ahead and we'll say user alt, and image alt will be user, lowercase. Right, and we'll go ahead and give that a class as well. Go ahead and grab the one. And the fill is going to be white, so let's go ahead and fix that in the SVG. Like that. And then we have the chatbot-kit user message. All right. Let's go ahead and create the message container. It's going to be a div. We'll say message container. Going to have class. Then the arrow here, let's go ahead and double check that. That's going to be a div as well, and the text content is going to be here. Okay. So we're going to have a div that has this class. And we're going to accept a message here. And the message is going to be the text content of the message container. So let's go ahead and create this arrow and add the class like that. And now we have to sew everything together. So let's start with the arrow and the message container. So the message container will have the arrow as its child. The avatar container will have its image as a child, and then the regular container will have both the message container and the user, avatar container. Then we'll return message container, or just container, excuse me. And let's go ahead and do it here. We'll do user message equals create user, say hello world, and we'll do container class list add user, not class list, append child user message. And let's refresh. And there we have our user message. All right, sweet. Let's go ahead and do the same for the chatbot message. And go ahead and find the chatbot message in our React code. So chatbot message. We'll just look at the markup here. I'm going to have a chatbot message container, and it's going to have a avatar inside of that. And there's some custom logic here to add custom components or switch out stuff. Let's not care too much about that for now. We're just going to care about building out this this chat message from the bot's perspective. So I'm going to go ahead and grab all of the styles here for the chatbot, and we're going to go ahead and put those in our vanilla project. Let's go ahead and say here, go ahead and swap all of the Reacts out with vanilla again. We have, so we have a loader here. All right, let's keep that as it is for now. And we'll go ahead and get started on implementing the chatbot message. So let's go ahead and create the container. We can just grab this, be relatively or somewhat similar, not exactly the same, and maybe we'll look at ways to dry up our code later on, but for now we're going to do it this way. So let's add this class, and then the next is the avatar container. All right, so I'm gonna do it the easy way right now and grab all of this. We're going to have to make some changes as we go along, but now we'll do the adaptions when we need them. Put in the avatar, then we have the chatbot icon, or the chatbot avatar letter. All right, so we'll use the letter for now, and we'll remove this, and we'll create a paragraph, and we'll say document create element E, and paragraph text content is going to be B for now. Then we'll do class list add avatar letter. Then we have the vanilla chatbot message, going to be this one. Chatbot bot arrow is going to be this one. And the avatar container is going to append the paragraph, message container, get the arrow, the container will get both. And if we go up here and we add on spot message, let's go ahead and see where this is going to lead us. So we'll put the bot message in, and we're gonna have a spectacular break because message is not defined, and that is true. So let's put the message in, and we'll go ahead and hit refresh, and not working exactly as expected. So vanilla chatbot-kit chatbot message. We have, I think we need maybe save here. All right, and we need to flip the order of our appends here because we want it to be the other way around. Not on this one, but this one. Because the order here matters in how the DOM structure looks. So this will be the first child and this will be the second child. And if you use something like Flexbox, then the first child will be on the left-hand side and the second child will be on the right-hand side. And so the order matters in how you append them, depending on the look that you want. So here we have kind of the chat bot message right now. So that's perfect. We have the basic structure that we wanted for now. There's some quirks to fix, I think. Margin. Let's go ahead and remove those. I'm sure there's a reason I put them on in the first place. I just can't remember exactly why right now. So let's go ahead and do this. All right, so now we have our basic kind of structure here. What we need to do now is to kind of handle the state and the state updates, because we don't have a framework to do that for us now. So we need to figure out a way to re-render and update our application once we have our state. So that's going to be the next thing we are going to be focusing on. So let's just go ahead and implement some state handling and see how we go. And first, I just want to head over to the React package docs, and I want to get this initial messages property from the config example. And then we'll head back to our application, our JS application, and we'll paste that into our config. Now, we also need a few helper functions. For instance, this create chatbot message. And we're going to grab those from the chat utils section of our React package. These are just plain old JavaScript functions, so we can just grab them, create a new file in source called utils.js, and we'll paste that in. And then we'll import create chatbot message from utils.js. All right. So now we want to go from hard coding our messages here to actually have them being state driven. So we need to handle that. And let's go ahead and create a new file and a new folder called state and state.js. And we'll create a function called state manager. And we'll start thinking about what we need to do. So what we want is we want to keep an overview over properties that may affect how our application is going to look. So keep an overview over the state. That's the collection of properties that may affect our application. And then we want to expose methods for interacting with the state. So we need to update the state somehow. And finally, we need to be able to re-render our application when state changes. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and first we're going to accept initial states as a argument or parameter. Argument is when it's passed in, so we'll just keep to the correct methodology or terminology. So let's go ahead and create the state, set it to be equal to the initial state. We'll create a listeners array, which is going to hold the re-render functions that we want to trigger once our state updates. So let's go ahead and create two functions, a state updater, and we'll also go ahead and create a register listener. And we'll implement this one first because it's the easiest. Just going to be listeners push, and we're going to accept a listener func. That's going to be put in here, and we'll create one more function called fire listeners. So in the state updater, we want to receive an updater, and I'm thinking that the updater could either be an object or a function. And if it's a function, we'll go ahead and pass it or call it, and we'll pass the state as the argument. So if the updater type of updater equals function, then we're going to call the updater with the state, and we are going to use the result to set the new state. That needs to be a let. Else, we're going to say state equals the previous state and then the updater. And after that, we'll fire the listeners. So that will call this function. So that means that once we've updated the state, we're going to re-render our functions and pass in the new state. So we're gonna go ahead and grab the listeners array, and for each listener, we're going to call them, and we'll pass in the state object. All right. And from here, we'll return the initial state object, state updater, and the register listeners function. So this is a basic implementation, and we're going to use it for now in our index.js file. We are going to create an initial state object that is going to hold messages, and it's going to be an array that just takes the initial messages from the config, and we want to call the state manager function. So we're going to import that from state.js, and then we want to grab the state from that, the updater, and the register listeners function. And that's going to be the result of calling the state manager and passing in the initial state. And now we need to change this a little bit, because this needs to be its own function. So we'll have a render function, and it will be responsible for rendering the chat and appending it in the DOM. So let's go ahead and see what we want to do here. first of all, we want to call the render function. And we'll go ahead and make sure everything still works. And that looks good. And now we want to make sure that we can pass our state through to the render chat function. So we'll go ahead and give the render function state. And it's also going to take in the root element. So render will accept root L and state. Then we'll pass the config and the state to the render chat function. We'll go to the chat and we'll just make sure we log out the correct variable here. If we refresh, we have the messages array available to us. That's going to hold the hello world message that we created in our config down here. So now what we want to do is want to use that state.messages in our create message container. So we're going to pass it down there, and then inside of this function, instead of hard coding this, we're going to use that messages array. So messages for each message. And we want to do some checks on the message. And if we check our utils file, you can see that a message consists of a message, a type, and an ID. So I'm gonna do const message and type from this variable, which is the current iteration. And we're gonna say if message or if type equals bot, then we want to render the bot message, append that to the container. Otherwise, we'll create a user message. And then we want to pass the message through in each instance. So now if we go to our browser and refresh, we have the hello world message that we expect from our state. So now it's completely state driven. And if we go to our index.js, we add another chatbot message here. So they do you need help? And then we could add a user message. And that's going to update our user chat. Now we can update that dynamically through the config. But we still have some work to do in order to actually use the state updater to update it. So let's give it a shot just to see what we need to do. Refresh that to the previous state and get a clean slate. But we want to make sure that we can update the state with this updater and then re-render the functionality. So let's go ahead and try to do that. We're going to say updater, and that's going to receive a function that takes the state, which is passed in from the state manager, because remember, this is called inside of the state manager. And we want to return an object, which is going to be the previous state. And we're going to set a new property called messages. And we're going to copy over all the messages from the current state. And let's go ahead and just add a message here. So we're going to go ahead and create a chatbot message that says state updated. And we are going to register listener. And the listener we want to register is the render function. That's going to take the root L and the state. And right now, I don't think this is going to work for multiple reasons. First of all, we're rendering two chatbots into the DOM, which is the result of calling a render function twice, and we're just attaching to the same element. So we need to clear that somehow. And I think I'm just going to say let current equals, yeah, we're just going to have it as undefined. And inside of the render function, we're going to say if current root L remove child current, and then down here we'll say current equals chat. And that will give us one window, but we still don't have the updated state. And that's because we've actually broken the link between the state here. So when we update it, it's not getting the updated state. So what we need to do is we need to go in our state manager, and we've actually done it already in our fire listeners. We're passing the new state in here. So we need to accept new state in our function here, and then pass the new state to the render function. So if we refresh now, our state gets updated because we're passing the new and refreshed state instead of the old and stale. So if we want to, we can add any amount of messages using this updater. So maybe next time we want to use the updater to add a message, hello, and the type is going to be user. And if we refresh, we're able to dynamically add a user using our custom state handling. And now our application is totally state driven, which is pretty cool. And we can use that to build upon and make it a lot more dynamic, which we're going to focus on coming up. All right, so now that we have state implemented, we can go ahead and take a look at the two missing pieces that will make up a functioning chatbot. So let's go ahead and head over to the React package docs just to get a feel of what they are. So you can see here in the code example that the message parser and the action provider is actually passed in from the outside. So that means that they are user defined, and the user actually writes the implementation of these two classes. Now, the reasoning for that is that the user needs to define what messages to respond to and what actions to trigger, because that's kind of how it works. The message parser gets all of the inputs and then triggers an action on the action provider. So if we take a look at the input field down here in the bottom right corner where my head is currently positioned, I want to move a little bit and just write something here for you. So if I write hello here, then the domain of the message parser is to take this hello message and trigger a corresponding action from the action provider. So that's kind of how it works, and we want to go ahead and implement this right now. So if we go back to our chatbot documentation and we click this go to gist, then you'll open a new code snippet, and we'll get started by just copying the message parser and action provider class that is provided here as kind of boilerplate. And then we'll go back to our code and we'll remove the updaters that we put in earlier because we don't need those anymore. But let's go ahead and head over to our index.html, because here we are loading in the index.js script, which kind of contains our chatbot code. And we don't want to write these implementations inside of there, because we want the user to be able to work with these classes. So we'll create a new script tag module here, and we'll go ahead and create a class of message parser and an action provider. And then we'll take a look at what they actually do. So the message parser, you can see, receives the action provider as input. And it also has a parse message. So somehow we're going to have to wire this up so that the form input makes its way in here. And the action provider, it receives some input as well once it's initialized. And that is the create chatbot message, a set state function, and a create client message. And the set state function is actually the updater that we created or just removed in our index.js file. So let's go ahead and handle the internals now. So if we head over to index.js, we need to wire it up here. So we have this render chatbot method. And you can see we're already accepting the message parser and action provider as parameters. But now we need to kind of instantiate them. So we'll go ahead and create an instance of each, and we'll start with the action provider. And we'll create that by saying new action provider. Excuse me. And then we'll go ahead and do the same for the message parser. Now, as we saw in our index.html file, we need to provide some input here. Specifically for the action provider, it takes a create chatbot message, a set state function, and a create client message. So let's go ahead and implement that. And we already have the create chatbot message up here. So we'll pass that as the first argument. And then we'll pass the updater that is coming from here. And now we need the create client message. And I believe we don't actually have that here because we copied an earlier version. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to my React package code and just copy this function here. If you clone the latest repository, you should have it already, but I didn't, so I need to copy it over. So I'll put that inside of the utils.js in my working project and just put it right underneath the create chatbot message here. So heading back, we'll add that as the third argument. We'll import that from here. Just make sure everything is saved. All right, so now we have the action provider instance, and we need to pass that action provider instance to the message parser when we're instantiating that right here. So that should do it. So our message parser will take the action provider. It has a parse method. That's all well and good. Now, let's go ahead and make sure that we can get this message parser instance where it needs to be. And if you think about it, we are defining it here. So this is the kind of the initialization function. And the user is passing in the message parser, and we're instantiating it here. But this is not the place where we actually need to use it. That is kind of further down in our call chain. So inside of this method, we're calling the render method here. So let's go ahead and move that down here. And we're calling it in two places here. So let's make sure we update both. And we want both to have the message parser instance. And then we'll go ahead and we'll work from there. So inside of the render, we are calling the render chat function. So we need to go ahead and first accept the message parser instance as a parameter and then pass it along to the render chat as an argument. And the difference between that is that the parameters are the designations that you use when you define the function. So these are parameters, and arguments are names for things you pass in when you invoke a function, which we're doing right here. So let's keep going inside our render chat function, which is in chat.js. We are accepting this a parameter, and now we're getting a little bit closer. So inside of create form here, we want to pass that along because the create form is the method responsible for setting up our entire form. And we want to accept that as a parameter here. And for now, we'll just go ahead and console log the message parser instance. And then we'll go back to our index.js because we still have a little bit of work to do here. Because right now we're calling the render chatbot function here. That's not going to work for us anymore because we now need to pass in the message parser and the action provider, which are defined inside of our index.html file. So now we need to make this available out here. And we need to move the config and also the root element. So let's do that first. We'll move the config out here, put that at the top, and then we'll move the root L, put that here, and then we have to make first this render chatbot function available, but then we also need to pass the create chatbot message. So we'll do window vanilla JS chatbots equals a object with render chatbot and create chatbot message, which we already have imported up here. So now we can remove this call. And I think we need to do something else because we had the config defined here and we're using the config here, but we're not passing it in as a parameter. So let's make sure we do that as well. Inside of here, I want to pass the config as an argument and accept it as a parameter. All right. So inside of index.html now, we want to do const render chatbot and create chatbot message. And we want to destructure that of the vanilla, let's see what we called it, vanilla JS chatbot. And we'll put window here just to be explicit. Okay. So let's go ahead and see where we're at. Some errors here. So file not found. Okay. Module. Oh, right. So I wanted to say type module, not source. Now we get a different error. All right, we're not calling the render function. So inside of index.html, we want to now call the render chatbot. And that's going to take the root L, the config, message parser. And that's going to be message parser with the capital action provider, because that's the class names we used here. now. All right, so now we've got our chatbot back, and we can also see that we successfully passed the message parser down to the create form function where we're logging it out right now. So now what we need to do is we want to make sure that the parse method on the message parser is called whenever we submit our input here. And we're going to do that by creating a onSubmit handler on the form and making sure that we are able to parse the message that comes in. So let's go ahead and create the onChange handler or onSubmit handler. And to do that, I know that we also are going to need the updater function. So we're going to go ahead and pass that down as well. So inside of render, accepting it, we'll move it down to render chat. Inside of render chat, we'll accept the updater here, and we'll pass it along to create form. All right, so inside of here, what we want to do is we want to create a function, and we'll call that handle submit, and it will accept the event parameter that's passed to every event handler, and we're going to say prevent default. And when the form is submitted, we want to get the input value. We'll destructure that from the input. And first we want to do updater. We want to update the state with a client message. So let's say message create client message, and that's going to just import the client message up here. And the client message is going to be created with the value from the input field. And then we'll do state. We'll return an object with all of the previous state, and messages going to be state messages and client message. Sorry, message. All right. And now we want to do message parser instance dot parse, and that's also going to be with the value of the input field, and then we'll say input value equals empty string. All right, so form onSubmit equals I will submit. Okay, so now we've written a lot. Make sure some of this is working. Okay, we need to go back to our chat, add JS here, and let's go ahead and see what's going on. All right, so now we have the ability to update our state, re-render our component, and it's going to create the client message for us and update the state so we get the correct rendition of the or the correct view based on the state that's been set. So the next part you see here is actually our parse method being invoked in our message parser. So if we go to our index.html, this parse message here is now being invoked whenever we submit our form. So what we can do here is we can say if message to lower equals hello, or maybe it's better just to includes hello, then we want to do action provider, and we want to call the method hello. Now this method doesn't exist yet, so we need to make sure we create it. Let's go ahead and say console log hello from chatbot here and see what this will give us. So if you now write in hello, we log out hello from chatbot. That's excellent. That's exactly what we want. And now we're going to use this to kind of update the state. So we'll say const message equals create chatbot message. Make sure to put this in front of it. And we'll say hello from chatbot. And then we'll go ahead and say set state. And we'll return the previous state. And then we'll reset the messages property to be all of the previous messages and this new message. All right, so once we do that, it's going to update the state. It's going to fire off the events that we defined here, so all the listeners, and then it's going to re-render. So let's go ahead and see what happens. If we say hello, we get a message back, hello from chatbot. If we write something else, we still get our client message, but the chatbot isn't responding anymore. And that's because we haven't defined any rules for that. That happens inside of the message parser and the action provider. So the message parser provides the rules for when to invoke a method from the message action provider, and the action provider creates the action to implement and handles the integration with the state. So now we have a fully functioning chatbot, and most of the parts are actually falling into place. So we're going to take a look at adding a bit more embellishments, but we're getting really close now. So all right, so now it's time for us to focus on implementing widgets. And I'll give you a brief introduction to what widgets are. Basically, when I created this chatbot in React, I wanted the user to have a lot of control over what was going on in the chatbot. So if I open it up here, you can see that kind of the basics of the chatbot is the ability to receive messages back and forth. But then I also wanted the user to have some measurement of control over what's going on beyond that. So imagine you wanted to build a checkout flow, or you wanted to build a quiz, or something that required more than a back and forth of chat messages between the user and the chatbot. Well, the widgets are what enable you to do that. So basically in the original or in this package here, widgets are things that are just rendered with the chatbots as React components. So you can build any React component and then you'll render it to the screen using the create chatbot message function and specifying what kind of widget you want to render. So this is actually a widget that just displays kind of the internals of how the chatbot works. And then you have like some options down here which you can click as a part of this widget, and it'll trigger a response from the chatbot again. So basically, if we go down here and just take a look at the configuration here, I configured the widget so that you provided a function and a widget name, and then you have map state to props, which basically allows you to give the widget a set of props from the chatbot state. And then you have a prop section where you can define custom properties to pass to the widget. So the widgets basically allow you to do anything you want within the chatbot, and it's quite an important function to be able to customize it in the way that you want. So I thought we'd go ahead and would implement that in our Pure.js implementation. Let's go ahead and see how we can do that. And I want to open the React version first because we want to go to our chatbot file and we're just going to check out what's going on here. So inside of our chatbot, we create something called a widget registry. And the widget registry gets the setState function and the action provider. And then we are retrieving all of the widgets from the config. So if you remember, we just looked at it. The config has this configuration here, which is an array of widgets. So the function here just retrieves those elements from the config. And then for each widget, we are adding it to the widget registry. And that widget registry now holds like an object over all our widgets. And inside of our chatbot, we are checking to see if the message that comes in has a widget attached to it. And if it does, we call that function. And the reason that we are passing a function, or the reason that we have a function defined here that returns an element, that's because we want to be able to control the input to the function. So we want to give the widgets access to the chatbot state. And the only way to do that is to define a function which we can then call and inject the properties that we need into the widget. Because the way JavaScript works, where your function is called kind of defines what you can pass into it. If we call the function outside of the chatbot, we don't have access to the chatbot state. So we need to make sure that we call the function in an area of the code that has access to the data that we wanted to have access to. So the only way we can make that happen is to pass a function that is called from inside of the chatbot. All right. So what we want to do is we want to take a look at this, this widget registry. So let's go ahead and open that up. And this is in the React component, but I think the same kind of structure of this class is going to apply to our JS component, because inside of here we have this add widget function, which takes the widget name, which comes from the config, the widget function, and the map state to props. And it takes that and it creates an entry into the widget registry widget name object. So once we have that, we can call the getWidget method to retrieve it inside of the function that we need. So we're basically creating properties on the widget registry that holds kind of this functionality here that we want. So let's go ahead and start by copying this over. And we'll create a new folder here called widgets or widget registry. And we'll create a new file called widget registry.js. And we'll copy that in, and then we need the get object from utils here. Let's just make sure we have that in our JS project. So let's see, get object, no, export const. We already have that. Okay, so now we have that. And let's make sure we import this from the right place. Going to import get object from utils. And we'll add JS to that. All right, so now we have the possibility to get this blueprint, instantiate it, and then add the widgets that we want. So let's go ahead and get started on that first. So we're going to give it the setState function and the action provider. So inside of index.js, we're going to say widget registry equals new widget registry, and it's going to take the updater and the action provider instance. And then we already have that imported at the top because my editor did it for me automatically, which is handy. And now we're going to get the widgets from the config object. Let's take a look at how we did that in chatbot.jsx. Get widgets, which is a function here. So we're going to copy that over as well. We're going to need to use this as well. Basically, just checks if we have a config object, if we have widgets on the config object, and then we return it if we have it. Otherwise, we get an empty array. So I'm going back to my JS project, just copying in the get widgets function. And then we're going to go ahead and do get widgets config. And we need to make sure we copy that over, import the get widgets function. And now we're going to do widgets for each. And we're going to take each widget, we're going to do widget registry, add widget, and we'll pass in the widget. That was a lot of widgets. All right, so basically, you know, the widget is a component, so it's a collection of, you know, DOM nodes and data that we want to render to the screen. And what we're doing now is we are registering them inside of the chatbot. So we're taking what's in the config and we're saying, all right, here is all of the available functions or widgets that we can use inside of our chatbot. And then we're just registering them, and we are mapping all of the properties and state to them that we need. And then we are going to use the widget registry inside of the, we're going to pass it through the render method, and then we are going to use it to render a widget to the screen. So I want to go ahead and alter my config objects to include a widget. So let's go ahead and we're gonna copy a entry from here, from the documentation. And let's say widget. And we'll say overview. And the function, let's go ahead and create a new function. So let's create a widget that takes an input from an input field and then renders it to the screen. So we'll say, what should we call it? Let's call it input field widget. That's just the name of the function. it's going to take props. And the first thing we'll do is we'll console log that in here, because we want to make sure we just see what we get out in the other end. And then we're going to replace this with the input field widget. So this is the function that we are defining here. We're going to create a state entry here called input. And we are going to start that at an empty string. And we are going to map the input to the props here. All right. Now we need to make sure that we create an input element here. So we'll say document create element input, and then we'll say const output equals document create element div, and then we'll go ahead and we'll create a container. So that is going to be the outer container, and we'll do container and child input. We'll do container and child output. And let's see, we'll return the container. All right. So now we define a widget entry. We created a widget that has a container with an input field and an output field that is just an empty div right now. And we registered our widgets in our widget.js, sorry, our index.js. So let's go ahead and go to our widget registry and just see that we are adding this widget. And I just want to get the widget name. And let's go ahead and check out that our console is actually adding the widget. Yes. Now we're adding it, and the name is overview, which we defined in our config. Let's call it input field widget, and we'll see the name change here now, as it should. All right, so now what we want to do is we want to make sure that we can send the widget registry down to where we create our chat messages. So what we'll do is we'll make sure that we move this up before we register our listener, and we'll make sure we pass it to both these render functions. And we'll make sure we accept it as a parameter and pass it on to render chat. So let's keep going down the rabbit hole, and we'll go to chat.js and we'll accept widget registry as a parameter. And we are going to pass it on to the bot create message container, not the bot med. So the create message container function, because that's what sets up the messages for the bot and the user. So what we want to do is we want to go into create chatbot message, and we are going to make a check here. on whether or not we are rendering a widget. All right, so let's start by passing the widget registry to the create message container. Make sure we don't remove what's already there. And in the create messages container, we'll accept the widget registry. Then we'll pass it to the bot message. So here, if we have a message widget, let's go ahead and retrieve that widget, or first log it out. We'll see if we have one. And what we also need to do is we need to wait to trigger the widget. Now we've already registered it. We passed it down to where it needs to be used. But our message, our chatbot message, has no idea that we want to render this widget. So let's go ahead and go to index.html. And in our create chatbot message here, we can give it an options object. And the options object will say widget and will say input field widget. So that'll match the name down here. And this is going to give us information that we can use when we render the chatbot message. Basically saying, hey, we have this widget, it's called input field widget. We want you to get that from the widget registry and render it to the screen. So now if we go to our chat file, we can go ahead and save this and we'll make sure, check if we get that up on the screen now. So widget registry is not defined. Go ahead. Okay, so we have a little typo here. Side of render chat. Right there. So now we refresh. We can't really see the console log that we put in yet. So let's go ahead and just make sure that we have the widget registry here. And we do. So let's go ahead and see console log our message. All right, so right now we're just getting the plain text message. So let's see if we can get the full message. Right, so here we are destructuring message and type from the message. We're checking the type. So what we want to do is we want to do pass the full message down here. Then inside of our create chatbot message, we are going to do message, and then we'll do a refresh. So now side of chat.js at 155, we log mess. We now have the full message. So we can do the structure widget here. Because you can see we have that as a property on this object. And what we want to do is we want to take that widget and we want to check So if we have a widget, we want to call the widget function on the registry, on the widget registry. So if we go back and see here, we have a widget registry here, and we want to call get widget with the widget name. So let's go ahead and do widget registry get widget, and we'll pass the widget name. And okay, so now that we have the widget markup here, let's go ahead and log it out. And I do know that we need to do a couple of things in order to get this to work, because right now this will break. Yeah, and the reason is we are trying to read a property that we haven't defined, and that happens inside of the widget registry. We have this scroll into view function, and we'll just remove that for now to make sure that we're not trying to access something that doesn't exist. And then I think we also need to add, so we need to add the state. So if we look at this get widget function, it needs the widget name and the state object. So inside of our chat.js, we're only passing the widget right now, and we need to pass the state as well. So let's go ahead and go to our initial function here, where we do have access to the state, and we can pass it here as the third argument, which I already did. And then we can accept it here in create message container, and we'll keep passing it along to create chatbot message. And then we accept it down here as a parameter, and now we can pass it to the widget get widget function. So if we refresh, now we can see that we have the props here, and this is the markup that we are returning from our function. So this right here is equivalent to what we are defining inside of this function here. One thing I'm noticing is that this input is undefined and it should be empty string. So that tells me we have something going on in our widget registry. The mapping is not completely right. And if we check out quickly here, console log state prop, which is going to be the input, and we'll also log the prop as well, and hit refresh. Now we have undefined and input. So okay, we're trying to access inputs and it's coming to back as undefined. So let's take a look at our index file. Right, so we've added a layer here that we didn't have from before. So I'm gonna go ahead and remove this and just spread the config state directly on this object. So now we should be able to access the state, and if I refresh, I expect this to be empty string. Yeah, so now it's correctly done the mapping here. Great. Let's go ahead and go back to our chat.js. And now we want to kind of add this on this container here. So I'm going to go ahead and create a outer container. And it's going to be a div. And the outer container will have a style display flex. And it's going to have a style flex direction of column. And I want to append the container. I want to return the outer container. And now I want to add another child here called widget container. It's going to be a div. And we'll go ahead and add the widget container. We'll append the widget markup. And we are going to do outer container, append child widget container. All right, so now if we refresh, still got something a little bit funky going on here. So inside of this div, let's just work a little bit with this. Flex, it's going to have flex direction column. So that takes care of it, but why isn't not applying in the first case is another. All right, flex direction, not something totally inedible. All right, so now we have the widget here, and we can write in this input field. And basically what I want to do is I want to output what I write here in the contents of the output field. So how can we do that? Well, we have already hooked this up so it has access to the state. So we have the input state field that we defined here. And basically what I want to do now is I want to take that input field and I want to update it when I type into here. So let's see how we can do that. So inside of our index.html, so we're now inside where we're defining this content. We have props here. So we're logging it out. So let's just make sure we're in the input field widget, just so we can see in our console what our props are. And we have this set state here. So what we can do is we can create a function and we'll call it update input. And it's going to take an event and the value is going to be e target value. Okay, and then on our props object, we have the set state function. And now what we want to do is we want to use that, and then we want to pass the function. So this set state function, that's the same function as this updater here that we have used before, right? So we're just have access to it inside of here because we're passing it along when we invocate this function. So we're going to say that all of the previous state, we'll copy that over, and then we want to set the input to be equal to the value of the input field. And now let's do input, and we'll say onChange equals the update input function. And then let's go ahead and go back to our browser. And we'll type something in, lose focus, and nothing happened. So let's go ahead and, oh, stopped logging out the properties. So let's go ahead and see. Yeah, our input is now set to TES. Now, we're still logging it out here, right? So we can now take the output and say text content is going to be equal to, and that's going to be the, let's do it like this, props input, just to keep it properly namespaced. So now, if we write something and we lose focus, then we updated the output here. So that means that we can now create widgets that we can pretty much configure to do anything we want within the chatbot, and also have access to chatbot states and chatbot state updaters, which is a really big thing, because that means you can kind of control anything from your widgets, which is really powerful. So that was a big piece that just fell into place. So thanks a lot for coming along, and we'll do some minor adjustments and cleaning up a little bit coming up next. All right, so we're pretty far along in terms of functionality in our chatbot. We can send a message, we can define a response and parse the message and make an explicit response to a chat message that comes in. We have the ability to add widgets to our messages, which can be anything. And what's next is kind of just making a few tweaks and fixes and a few embellishments that'll take it a little bit to the next level. So in the React package, we have the ability to have the chatbot use this loader as it's responding. So you wait a little while before the message comes. It doesn't come straight away. So we're going to go ahead and implement that in our JavaScript chatbot. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this SVG from the loader in the React package. And then we will go to our chat.js inside of our vanilla chatbot. And we're going to go ahead and create a new function. That's going to be create loader. So first I want to create a container. So we'll make a new variable and we'll say document create element div. And inside of that div, we are going to place the SVG. And then we will return our container. All right, so that should take care of the loader. And now we need to determine when we want to show it. And that's going to be in this create bot chat message here, which I now realize is named totally backwards, but it is what it is. So let's go ahead and find where we're adding the message, which is down here. And what we want to do is we want to do a check. And we want to check. Let's go ahead and log out the message here just to see what's on it. And we'll remove this. And if I refresh now, we'll see that the message object has some properties. And one of them is loading. So we're going to use this loading property and go ahead and check whether or not it's loading. And if it is, we'll set the loader to be the child of this message container. And if it's false, we'll add the text content. And then we'll handle updating the state after that. But let's go ahead and do that first. So we can go ahead and destructure the loading property. And here we can do a check. So if loading, we want to do loader equals create loader. So that's going to be the container element with the SVG inside of it. And then we want to say message container append child loader. And if it's not loading, we want to add the text content. All right. So now if we refresh, we have the loader running here because the initial state of the message is always loading. And then we have to handle setting it to not loading. So that's the next thing on our list. And let's go ahead and check in the chatbot message what the timeout is. So the timeout is the default disable time, which is 750 milliseconds. All right, so we'll just use 750 here as well. So we'll create a set timeout and we'll give it a callback and we'll go ahead and create a constant for that. And we'll call it default message loading time. And that's going to be the milliseconds that we want to wait before we run the updater function. So now we need to make sure that we have the updater function available to us inside of create chatbot message. So let's go ahead and see where we have it. Where is the closest place where we have the updater function? So we pass it to render chat. And render chat is where it stops. So let's go ahead and pass the updater to create message container. We'll accept it as a parameter and we'll pass it on to create bot chat message. So the function where we're in now, and we'll accept it here as well. All right, then basically what we want to do is we want to find the message that we're currently working with. And we want to update it to be loading false after the default message loading time. So what we want to do in here is we want to find the current message and we want to update it. And then hopefully once we update it, we'll set loading to false, we'll re-render, we'll hit this clause again, and loading will no longer be true. So we'll set the message container's text content to be the message. So let's go ahead and log out the message again, just because I want to see if there's something we can use in order to identify this message. And it is, we have an ID property that we can use. Great. So let's use that ID to find the current message and update it. So what we'll say is we'll say const new message equals state messages find. And we'll say mess. And then what we want to do is we want to match this ID with the ID that we have accessible to us on the current message object here. So that's what we're going to match. So what this does is it takes all of the messages in the messages array in the state object and it iterates over them one by one. So for each message we go through and we check, does this message match the current ID that we have? And if it does, we want to return that object or the reference to that object. And what we can do now is we can say new message loading equals false. And then we'll return the entire state. So let's go ahead and see what that gives us. So now we have a loader. And you can see that we can write, if we just trigger our message parser, and we get a response from the chatbot, and it shows the loader before eventually showing the message. Okay, so let's keep going with the improvements. So one thing I noticed is this chatbot message seems to be a little bit disconnected from the user message. So I think, these two properties here can be removed, and then we can get a little bit tighter spacing. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. And we'll go ahead and find the create bot chat message, and we'll actually just remove these. And we'll refresh. See, that is a little bit tighter between the user message and the chatbot message. One thing I did notice as well is that when I write into the input field, I lose input when I submit. And I'd like the input field to stay focused because I might want to write more messages. So we're gonna tackle that as well. And we are going to find the input field here. And it has a class, vanilla chatbot kit input. So what we'll do is we'll go to our index file, and we'll go to our render function. And inside of our render function, we're going to find the input field. Query selector. And we'll give it that class, and we're going to say input field focus. So let's see if that does what we want it to do. Let's refresh. And now when we submit our message, the input field is still focused, which is exactly what we wanted. All right. So next up, we did something earlier where we removed a function from the widget registry called scroll to bottom. And what scroll to bottom does is that when you start overflowing this window here, you can see that the window doesn't actually follow the messages. So the scroll to bottom function is a function that kind of keeps that in sync, so that once you go down and overflow this container, the container is automatically scrolled to the bottom. So we're going to have to need to re-implement that. And I'll go to the original package just to grab that function. And it's called scroll to bottom, I believe. Do a search for scroll into view. That's it. So the way it works is it has a reference to the container, and then basically whenever it renders, it runs the scroll into view function. So we're going to have to do the same thing, and what we'll do is we'll just copy this. We'll change it a little bit in our case, but we'll have it as a reference. So what we want to do is we want to get a reference to the chat container. So we'll say const chat container. And let's go to chat.js just to see what that's called. And that's going to be here. So I'm wondering, actually, I'm going to check that. It's the inner container we want. Let's try with this one first. So what we want to do, we want to go back to index.js. We're going to say document query selector. That's that container. And we're saying going to drop the current because that's a React thing with ref. And we're going to make sure that it's scrolled to the bottom here by setting the scroll top equal to the scroll height. So let's go ahead and say scroll into view and do that on every render as well. And now we can go ahead and try to overflow this container. See, we're still having some issues. So my guess is it's firing. It's just not working as it's supposed to. Let's go ahead and check. Yeah, so chat container ref is not defined. All right, that makes sense. This is the chat container. Refresh. Go ahead and testing again. All right, so it's sort of working. There is some weird functionality going on here where we are, go ahead and drop the set timeout. See what happens then. All right, that's better. So now we are able to keep the scrolling or the chat window in sync with the messages once they kind of overflow the initial container. Next, we'll have to make sure that we can pass this function to the widget registry. So what I want to do is I want to actually put this in the utils, and we'll export it from here. And that means we'll have to import it up here. In our widget registry, we'll go ahead and we'll import the scroll into view function here and pass it as a prop. So that means that all of our widgets will get access to this function, so that if your widget is large, you can automatically scroll the window to the bottom. Another thing we'd like to add is some sort of error handling if we don't pass in the correct parameters to this function. So let's go ahead and take a look at how it's handled in the React package. So basically, up here at the top, if there's no config and no action provider and no message parser, we return a chatbot error. And also we do a validation of the props that basically just checks the props and let's take a look at what that does. So inside of the validate props, we check the config for an initial messages property. And if it doesn't have that property, we push an error message. And inside of the message parser, we take that message parser and we create a new one. And if it doesn't have a method called parse, then we give an error there as well. So we're going to go ahead and implement this as well in the plain.js version. So I'm going to go to utils. I'll place this validate props function here. And let's go to our index.js. And inside of render here, we'll check if, so if there is not a root element or no config or no message parser or no action provider, what we want to do is we want to render a error message. And we'll say create a function that renders that error message. And what we'll do, I have to do the same thing here. So if current, we're going to remove the current child. If not, we are going to append the error message. So we have the root element. Need to accept here as a parameter. And what we'll do is we'll say root L append child, and it will be the result of calling a new function which will build up the error message like that. And now we need to create that error message. So we'll create a new folder in chat. We'll create error message.js. The export create error message. And this function is going to return a structure equal to what we have in our React package. So we'll take a look at that. And it looks something like this. So first we'll grab the CSS. And we'll go to our chatbot in here. We'll go ahead and paste this in. And we'll change these to vanilla. And then we'll go back and we'll grab the markup just to have a reference. So we'll paste this in here and we'll comment it out. So first we need to create a container. And that's going to be a div. Going to have a class name, react-chatbot, and we need to change React to vanilla. And then we're going to create a header, element h1, and we'll say header text content equals, and we'll just put this in here. And then we have a inner container. That's going to be a div as well, and it's going to have this class name. Need to change that to vanilla as well. And then we have a link. So we'll create that. So that's an A tag. We're going to say link href. Going to be this. Link rel be this. And target is going to be blank, which will make it open in a new tab. And we'll give it a class name. Copy this, say link, class name, or class list, add. Change that to vanilla as well. And finally, the text content. Going to be view the docs. All right, so I think that's it. We need to add something to the inner container, but for now, we'll do container append child header, container append child text, inner container, and container append child is going to be the link. All right, so that's it. And now we need to focus on this chatbot message here. So basically, what we need to do is we want to render a chatbot message inside of the inner container. So if we go to chat.js, we take a look at the create chatbot message. It requires a message, it requires a widget registry, requires state and an updater. So let's take a look at the state. So that's going to run if loading is true. What we want to do is basically we want to create a message object and call this function here. Let's see. Right. So export this function. We'll import it inside of here. Say export const. What we want to do is we want to create a message, which is going to be a string we receive here, and this message is going to be an object. Let's call this message object, and we'll give it a message, say with avatar. Actually, we haven't implemented that, so we are just going to say loading false ID 1, and that's going to be it for now. And what we want to do is we want to call the create bot chat message. We want to import that from chat.js. And we'll pass the message object here as the bot message to to this function, and hopefully that'll create the correct object and return it to us. So we'll say inner container and child bot message. All right. So now that we have that, we'll return the container. And inside of our index.js file, inside of render error message, we're going to say create error message, and we'll import that from create error message from chat error message JS. So now let's go ahead and try to see if we can get this on the screen. And what we need to do is we need to go to our index.html, and we'll remove the message parser. So our message parser is not defined. That makes sense. Or move it from here. Now we refresh. Cannot read property and child of undefined. All right. Let's go ahead and see. Need to pass the root L, and we can't check on the root L because if we don't have an element to append to, we can't show the error message. All right. So we're getting there. To make sure that our CSS file that's saved. Okay, so we have the styling applied. It seems our message isn't, so we will see what we did wrong there. So it takes a message object, there's a message, a widget. Yeah, all right. So inside of our error message, we're accepting a message. And we need to add that when we call it. So we'll go to our index.js file. I'm not going to take the root element here. It's going to be, yes, it's going to be taking the root element here, and then in render error message, we're going to pass message here as well and pass it on. So let's go ahead and check the original for the error messages. So we'll grab this here and we'll put it inside of here as the second parameter. And now if we refresh, we have the message, although the container is a little bit squished here. So let's make sure we make this avatar container at least 40 pixels. So we'll go ahead and grab this class and do a search here for it. We'll add the in width 40 pixels here. All right, and the docs will take you to the React package right now because I don't have any docs for this one yet, and the concepts are quite similar. Let's keep going, and what we want to do is take a look at the chatbot again, and we have a validation here that validates the props that are being passed in. So the config and the message parser. So what I want to do, I actually want to grab this and let's go back to our index.js in our vanilla chatbot. And we want to check the config and the message parser that's coming in here. And the validate props, we copied over so we can grab that from our utils. And just to refresh in your memory, what it does is it takes the config and the message parser, and it checks if the config has an initial messages property on it. And the message parser must have a parse method. So what we can do, we validate the props here, and if we get any errors back, we are creating one message from that array of errors. And then what we'll do is we'll grab this call here and we will, instead of using this message from before, we'll send the root L and now the error message like this. We'll hit return here as well. All right, so that's quite similar, but let's try to go to our index HTML. And now we'll bring back the message parser, but we'll remove the parse method. So hit save on that and we refresh. Now the error message says that the message parser must implement the method parse. Please add this method to your object. The signature is parse message string. So that gives you a little bit of feedback if you forget to put some of the required properties into the chatbot. So let's see what happens if we go to our config and we remove the initial messages array. So now we get the message that the config must contain property initial messages, and it expects it to be an array of chatbot messages. All right. So if we have a parse method and we have the message parser, then the chatbot should render normally. And that is what we expect. So great. Now we have some basic validation in place just to make sure that some of the most important properties are sent in upon initialization. All right, so we're actually getting pretty close to wrapping this up. But before we do, let's make sure that we can expose this as an NPM package for other people to use. So if you're unaware, NPM is the package manager for Node, and you can find it at npmjs.com. And what we'll do is we'll expose our package here so other people can download it and use it in their own projects. So let's go to our code, and I've actually taken time to set up a default package.json. If you want to set up your own, you can do npm init-y, and that'll set up a package.json for you. And what we've done is we've given it a package name, we've specified a version, we've given it a description, and we've specified the module, and that's going to be source. Yes. So now we can do npm publish, and I want to do -- access public. Since this is a package that's under my name, by default it's going to be private. So let's go ahead and do that. And now we've successfully published our package. So let's go ahead and see if we can search for package here on the npm site. And here it is, version 009. So I want to go ahead and try to use this in a project, and that's going to probably give us a few things to clean up, but we'll go ahead and try it anyway. I'm just going to bring my terminal over, and I want to create a new project. So we'll call this chatbot test. And we'll do npm init -y. So that'll give us a package JSON. Open that in editor. Let's go ahead and do npm install save dev and the package name. So I'll do npm install the package name and then save dev. All right, and let's create a index HTML. We'll do L5. Let's create a index.js. We'll do a script type module source index.js. Okay. And in the index.js, we'll import the render, which is the default export, and the create chatbot message, and that'll be from node modules, and my username chatbot.js going to be source index.js. And now we need to grab all of the information that we had before in our index HTML file here. So all of this to go in our file here. So that's the widget. We need to add the render target. So go ahead and make sure we do that. Set a class. And we have the config, the root element, a basic message parser, action provider, and we'll do render here. And we'll do start that up. 2002. Sure we spell that correctly. All right, let's check this out. And there's our chatbot. Now we need to add the styling. Go to index.html and do link rel style sheet. And the type is text CSS. And the href is node modules text CSS. And close that. If we refresh, here we have our chatbot. And as you can see, our SVGs are kind of funky right now. That's because they're not packaged correctly, or not referenced correctly, I should say. So what I think we'll do is we'll make those inline, and then we'll remove some of the styling around here, because we don't really want that in the package. That's just for development purposes. We just want to include the styling in the package that's relevant to the chatbot. All right, so let's go ahead and fix the last here. And let's go ahead and start by finding the chat, and we'll find the button. Let's go ahead and find where we are adding the assets. So we're using user alt. So that's here, creating an image. So let's go ahead and rewrite that to be a div or image container. We'll give that's going to be a div. We'll do image container class list add. We'll do image container inner HTML, and that's going to user. Let's go ahead and this. Hit save on that, and then we'll add the image container down here. Let's go ahead and go to our localhost 3000, or maybe we need to start this up again. 8000. We still have our user icon now, but now it's inline as we. So we'll do the same with the paper plane. We'll do paper plane. That's here. So we'll say image container. Let's make sure that's in different functions so we have no conflicts. And then image container, no longer going to be source, inner HTML. We'll put SVG in there, remove that, move the reference there, and the reference there is also going to be updated. So now we hit refresh. We just need to do a couple of tweaks here in order to center this icon. So if we give this button display flex, then we'll give it justify content center and align items center. That should take care of it. So let's go ahead and add that to the chat button send class. Chat button send. That's going to be here. We'll add those properties, and that fixes it. So now it's time to just remove the CSS styling that we have here, and we're also going to remove our index HTML. So we'll remove that, and in our index CSS we will remove all of this. Now we don't have an index HTML file anymore, so we're just listing out the directory in our web server. So let's go ahead and do a npm publish So first we'll bump the package number, then we'll do npm publish access public. So that will give us a new package, and we're going to go ahead and use that in the other project here. Let's switch this, and we'll do npm install to retrieve the new version. And then we're gonna go ahead and start it again on 8001. Let's go ahead and swap this here, and now you can see we have the icons and the chatbot, and we're actually using the styling from this project here. So let's go ahead and just create the CSS file here. We're going to say body padding 0, margin 0, play flex by content center, align items center, background color light gray. Let's go ahead and use that in our HTML document. Cool. Text CSS. Right. Let's keep going. In height 100 VH. Give it actually some other background color here. Yeah, and I think we're close to done. Actually, I think we are done. So now we are in a different project using the chatbot that we created as a package. I did do a little hack though. I went over and I changed the font so that it just matched whatever the other fonts here. But that's really easy to do. Basically just did this and built a new version and then used it in this other project. But yeah, I think that's it. And thanks a lot for joining me on this adventure, or what should I say, this rewrite, so to speak, of my React package. It's been a blast rewriting this to JS actually, and I got to revisit a lot of old concepts that sometimes slip because you're not always working as directly with JavaScript as you'd like. If you're interested, I have a YouTube channel where I frequently post stuff and try to share as much as possible. And the reason I'm making this channel is because I have been in the position of having to learn all of this from scratch, and it's not easy, and it's not always a walk in the park. I mean, there's parts of learning to program that's infuriatingly hard, and sometimes it feels like you're just banging your head against a wall that will never budge. And I'm here to tell you that as long as you just keep going, that wall will budge most of the time, and you'll pick up some new concepts every single day you go at this stuff. And it's basically an exercise in discipline and executing. Some of the mistakes I often made was I did a lot of tutorials, just watching videos, and I've written about that earlier, that I thought that was a big mistake because I needed to get my hands down and start coding. And so what I would advise you to do, if you've done this with me now, I would advise you to go ahead and start a project on your own where you try to apply some of these concepts, and just get your hands dirty and start doing, because that's, I mean, there's no better way to learn, honestly. And video tutorials are great. You can pick up new concepts and you learn a lot from it, but it only sticks if you actually use it. And I'm speaking from experience on this point. So yeah, I think this is it. If you want to check out more, my channel will be down in the description, and you can search on it on YouTube. It's called Fredrik Oseberg Coding Lessons. The source code will of course be available on GitHub, so you can check that out. And if you have any questions or any input on what could be better or what you'd like to see, you can always reach out on Twitter. It's at @foseberg. So I'll write it in the chatbot here. And yeah, the YouTube channel is Fredrik Oseberg Coding Lessons, like that. So we can go and have a look there as well. It's basically a collection of, I like to teach what I know, and basically I like to teach the basics. I'm a big fan of learning the basics. So there's some React here now. There's some chatbot stuff. There's a lot about kind of web development and HTTP and how it kind of works under the hood. And then there's going to be a lot more later on JavaScript core concepts and stuff like that. So if you're interested, you know where to find it. And yeah, hit a like and subscribe if you want to see more from me. So thank you again for tuning into this series, and I hope you have a great day.